Well, welcome back to Steve and Friends. We've had a ton of technical issues today. We don't have Steve and we don't have Simon. They both came, but the service we're using is definitely having issues. And we've had issues over the last couple weeks with connections and latency issues. And I don't want to put out a garbage show and wreck the reputations of either Steve, Simon, or anybody else. So that's kind of where we're at right now. And I apologize. I wanted to come on and say what was going on. We were going to try a bunch of new features this week, but it hasn't worked out. So we're going to have Simon again. We still have all of our guests coming up over the next few weeks. We just hit some technical live issues 15 minutes before going on. And I personally made the call that we would just cancel this week so we can actually put out video and sound that people can hear. So that call is on me and not Steve, not Dan, not Simon. So I do apologize. Dan, how are you doing?
Good. Yeah, very good.
Good. Yeah, so I don't know exactly what we're going to talk about, but if you look over to the side beside Dan's head, we do have a live chat there. So if you actually want to test it out and see if our comments will be within inside of the smartphone graphic I put there, that would be cool. Um, we can just chat about economics, or we can just cancel the show, but I'd rather just keep going, right? So Dan, what do you think about the current situation of our product that we're trying to put out?
Well, as you know, behind the camera, we were talking about different options and coming up with a hybrid approach to some pre-recorded interviews. Um, I'm leaning a little bit more in that direction than Ty is, and an audience feedback would be really valuable for that to happen. What is a hybrid approach? A hybrid approach would mean that we could take the time to have interviews with some guests. We can condense, take away all the ahs, and this type of thing. Um, but we would have to be a little bit more diligent about when we can answer questions. So you might see a clip of 5 to 10 minutes of the conversation, moving back into studio environment, more Q&A. If that is the approach that we're going to go with, then we still have the lowest common denominator of problem that needs to be fixed, which is Steve's connection. And so that would require a hardwired interface into his internet, wherever he's happens to be, right? So that's kind of where I see the growth of the show going. What's your intuition there, Bud?
Well, I think again, like audience feedback is kind of key. Like I can bring up some examples of other podcasts and live streams that our audience would watch. And so one would be the Macro and Cheese podcast. Now they are pre-recorded. They release actually on Saturdays about 2 or 3 hours before we do our show. And then midway through the week, Steve, the individual who runs Macro and Chief, puts it on YouTube as a live stream. And so people can chat and listen to the show as it goes. So they have a release, a pre-recorded release on Saturday, and then midweek they have a live stream of that pre-record. And then people can chat and interact. And Macro and Cheese is part of a larger organization, Real Progressives, and they have individuals that volunteer at Real Progressives that are there on the chat interacting with people. So that would be one hybrid approach. Another hybrid approach may be that we record 30 or 40 minutes with our guests and with Steve. and then upload that as a live, go live right away with that, pre-record 40 minutes, and then at the last 20 minutes, you and I could interact with the guests. The problem with that is we obviously don't have Steve at that point unless he's willing to come on for 20 minutes. And who wants to sit and watch Ty for 20 minutes talking? I'm not.
we think Steve would say this, or we think. I mean, it's almost like, yeah, it's.
So we've got Olivia go for the hybrid approach. So there's one person that kind of says they want to go for the hybrid approach. Now, the whole reason this is happening is there's two things. Like Dan said, Steve has a poor internet connection, and regardless of whatever way we go, we need to resolve that. If we do a pre-record and he's got a poor internet connection, we still have the same problem. Now we're just recording a shitty show. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to be frustrated with that. And the other reason is we use technology, and I'm going to put them out there. It's called Restream. And so far we're having some issues with them. And today with Simon, he had a perfect internet connection, but Restream wasn't showing his feed to us, and we weren't seeing his feed coming to us. Like, so these are the issues why right now you are just seeing Dan and Ty and not Dan, Ty, Steve, and Simon.
Yeah.
So frustrating stuff. Anybody else who's watching right now, kind of give your opinion. Should we just go hybrid, pre-record the show, then put it on live? Should we just do a pre-recorded show and just put it out there on YouTube for people to watch? Or should we just try to stay live like we are right now and go with that in the moment? So,
great discussion with Professor Michaud. Hope he addresses the criticism from researchers that his estimated storage capacity is a factor 100x too high. I'm sure he will. That's a good one.
Yeah, we hope he addresses a lot of questions. So
Olivia's all go hybrid. Yeah. But I want to tell you about how hybrid can be amazing. We don't have to have a hybrid approach that is a full 40-minute pre-record. We could actually record like a 10-minute section and still keep all the live things, still gather all the live questions, right? It's just we have to then make the decision on how to I'm even thinking, like, push comes to shove, we could actually even have Steve just non-video, just sound up at like the voice of God in the background, right? I mean,
okay, and you know what? I agree with that. So I'll bring up another podcaster. His name is Douglas. Geez, I can't remember I watch his show each week. I will look it up after my stream of thought here, and I'll tell everybody because it's a good enough show to watch. But what he has is his partner, and his partner Biggio comes on, and he just does audio. Now, I'm not too sure if he's just afraid to show his face on camera, or if that is a tactic on Douglas's part to make sure that if there is a connection issue, it's not going to impact the live show. And they go for 3 hours long, which is like a marathon. And I watch this. I'll put it out there on the chat. So there is that issue. Just have Steve do audio, but
it's only if he doesn't have I think we can make it work. If his video and his signal drops off, we push him off. Here's the example of how it would be. Okay, so I'll give everybody an example. So I'm not Ty. Everybody can see that, right? I'm everywhere. This is called the voice of God, right? This is me up in the heavens talking. And if I make my voice slow and deliberate, then you never know what's going to happen. Ty, what do you think about the voice of God?
I enjoy the voices of God is in our outro every show. I love it. So
Are you predicting some sort of an apocalypse? Is that what you're trying to tell me?
It could be. So Botch Mandela says they don't care. Video or no video, it's all the same, right? Basically, Steve's value is his knowledge and his information he can give. He's a professor, so his speaking abilities on a topic are top notch. So that is an option we can look at. Just having his audio come on. And I suspect that's why he does it. Like his Phil Dobby podcasts are all just audio, which gives Phil great leeway if there's any connection issues to edit that, even if there's an audio connection issue. So let's say we record the audio ahead of time, and even if Steve has some connection issues, that can be chopped up. Audio is really easy to chop up versus video, and make it coherent, and sound professional. I do that with our promos. Like midweek, I put out audiograms on Twitter of the past week's show, right? And often I'll chop up the audio, I'll tweak the sound a bit. That's a lot easier chopping up audio than chopping up video. So that's an option as well. And so we have, if Steve records his video locally, if I have overlapped it. If Steve records his video locally, you could edit the footage in later. Some streamers do that. That's another option as well. So
what he's referring to is actually there's a technical way to hook up. I think it's called RTM something or other. It's there's another way to bring the feed into Restream, and you can actually I think overlay the better version on the live event after it's published. So something like that happens. But yeah, that I think gets a little technical for me. I haven't done that yet. But yeah, well said with Conrad about if Steve records his video locally. I mean,
what's important here is that I'm seeing like our regular viewers are pretty open to whatever we do, as long as they're getting the content. And that's just my main concern, guys, is that we're putting out the best stuff possible. I'm not originally a podcaster by any means. I work on like complex systems and do mathematics and build huge models, right? So podcasting's outside of my preview, you could say. But I have taken it quite serious over the last 4 months, right, with our intros and all that. So I just want to put out the best stuff I can, right? Because it's not only just weekly consumption. This stuff gets archived on YouTube, and people will watch it hopefully for the next few years or next 10 years, unless YouTube goes out of business, and then we're hooped. So it's important. It's important that I've tried to put out the best stuff possible, especially with having, Steve on and guests like Simon, Tim Garrett, Phil Dobby's coming on in next week. Hopefully that works out. And all the other guests we've had, right? I just want to make sure that they get the best experience possible. The people watching them gets the best experience possible, and we can all be happy. I know Steve is not on right now, but I want you to hit the like button if you're watching on YouTube, and comment after we go off the air. So I was kind of reading into the algorithm a little bit more with YouTube. The comments during the live don't seem to affect the algorithm at all, but the comments after the live, so underneath the video, have a tremendous effect on making sure our show gets shown or more impressions the following week. If you're watching on Twitter right now, retweet and like the video. And if you have a YouTube account, come over here and, chat it up with us. that was kind of the goal this week, is starting the show where we have an interactive chat on the side. And I was really freaking looking forward to putting that out there right now. I put up a tweet this morning, a poll, and this is we'll just kind of go off the streaming issues. I asked a question, and this might be interesting to some people, but does global unrest cause inflation, or does inflation cause global unrest? Or do the two feed back into each other? If you have Twitter, you can find me at Ty Keens, and go vote on that. It's something I'm trying to model right now. Like, I have large macroeconomic models, and one of the complex situations in those models are, how do you calculate inflation? At least a qualitative perspective. What causes inflation? And the first thing everybody goes to is, well, if wages increase, obviously inflation will increase with some sort of a lag. But obviously, it's more complex than that. So I've added many different factors, and global unrest came to mind. And I sat and I pondered this morning, what caused it? What is the causal loop there, or is it feeding back onto each other? So if you do have Twitter, go vote on that and comment. Give me some ideas, right? Because I'd like to put those ideas, take them, and then see if I can mathematically correlate them to other variables, right? And sometimes when you're modeling something and you're alone and you're sitting in front of your computer, you start coming up with your own in your head ideas, and you get trapped in those ideas. So I like constructive criticism. Yeah. Dan,
Yep.
we'll talk about Dan here. Dan has a media website. It's called Plankson. You can find it at plankson.org. I'll just put up the website here. If you're interested in blogging, starting maybe a small blogging career, I highly recommend plankson.org. That's where I put my blog. So instead of going to Medium or starting up a, what do they call it, Substack page, and trying to get...
No offense to Steve because he has a Substack, but okay.
No offense to Steve because he does have a Substack page. If you're trying to gain a viewership, it's a great place to go put out your blog. So Dan has a network with Plankson, right? So when you put out a blog, you can get some initial viewers to kind of start your blogging career. He has a free option. So if money's an issue, you can still go use his platform, put out some blogs, get your link and link it on Twitter. But if you want to take it to the next step, he does have some premium packages. I'm not trying to do an infomercial here. It's just something that I do personally use. You can find my blogs on there. And it's just something that I've really appreciated it because, he's given me some spots on his main page with the blog. So that's definitely something I want people to check out. Dan, what can you say about Plankson?
I want to thank you for that. The free option, people have to email me, right? And they'll have to, because normally a free option when you sign up on Plankson, it just taps you into the newsletter. That's it. We've been a little slow with the newsletters coming out. No particular reason, but we used to be several times a week. I think we're changing up the strategy a little bit. I like the display of the unemployment and credit. It is interesting that it also overlaps with the misery index and the cycle of mortgage interest rates become negative and positive. Let me just take that comment down just for a second. I'm going to get you to pull it up again here in a sec. I created on the fly. I created this. The reason why this is not working is because I didn't do the transparency. So please bear with me. What my goal here to do, what I'm trying to actually do is, I'm going back to that point I said about Steve possibly being the voice of God. Okay, so he would be relegated to the back room. He would have the ability to speak like Ty can on cue right now. Ty, say something.
The voice of God is in the background.
Yes, that's right. And so it's a pluralistic voice, which we all know the God is some sort of outgrowth of all of humanity. So, anyways, my point here is that if we had a static image, and even if Steve, as a backup plan, if his video was kind of crapping out, we could still have a static image. And I'm going to show you what that would actually look like here. And I'm going to be doing two things at once. I'm going to be simultaneously giving a plug for Steve Dobby's podcast with Steve Keen, and I'm going to show you this graphic here. So
Daniel, it's Phil Dobby, not Steve Dobby, but
well, they merge so nicely together, right?
Oh,
so,
okay.
Yeah, it's a Steve Dobby show, right? Okay. Okay, I'm not good at multitasking. Ty, can you come in? I'm going to disappear, and because I'm just not doing this. Okay, so what are you going to expect here? What do you think is going to happen when I add this?
I think the show's probably, because with past experience over the last 4 months, the show's probably going to crash. A small regional war will start somewhere, all based on the decisions we make here right now. That's my prediction. Let's see what happens.
Oh my God, that is horrible. That's horrible. I know you had a bad show, bud, but I mean, really? Like, the world's not going to end. This is my point. Okay, how do you think that? What do you think about that?
That looks real.
We got to show Steve this and say, "Hey, Steve Dobby, you guys could have the Steve Dobby show."
Okay, so hold on here. This is the normal graphic for the Debunking Economics podcast, correct?
Yeah, that's right. And so I just made an overlay of it and kept the stream chat coming in. The point is it doesn't have to be Steve Keen and Phil Dobby. It could actually just be a static picture of us, or just Steve answering the questions if his sound is crap. That's all I'm saying. Right. So we can look, people are just like really coming in on economic, unemployment, and credit. So let me try and wrap it up. The only point was that if we do a hybrid approach of the show, and then we have a Q&A session, we can use a static image like this with voice only in the background to address the stream of comments that are coming in, right? You see my point? Okay, so I'm moving on. Unless you have something to say about that, I'll take down the overlay. Back, we got Ty's beautiful smiling face again. The voice of God is going to come down from the heavens and then grace everybody here and now, right? Well, that's it, right?
Now, the thing is I hope we don't have a bunch of religious fanatics watching right now, because we could be being quite insulting, saying we are the voice of God in the background.
Well, there's no vainness. We're not doing it in vain. And the point of a comedy is, like, we're doing it we're kind of poking fun at it. And if an authority figure can't take poking fun, then there's, in my opinion, there's some sort of impregnated like fault to it. So I'm fine with it. In fact, I go on and help produce a religious show. You know that. I mean, they keep telling me, they're like, "Hey, can we get Steve Keen?" I go, I don't think this is his kind of show. No offense. I don't think he's.
I do watch that show, and I often want to comment from my heart about certain topics, and I do restrict myself out of respect that I admit I'm an atheist. That's just, I believe. You know what, though? We could be a marble in somebody's drawer. We could be, right? There could be
as
that.
As long as it's not in someone's pocket. I mean, like,
yeah.
That's just like, like a front pocket. Like, oh God, that's gross. Stinky and like sweaty and,
Burn the heretics. Burn them at the stake.
So you have to ask yourself. I mean, the religious conversation has some sort of pull to it, because we were like knee deep into economics, and people are just like, enough of the show issues. And then we brought up religion, and then the chat started to go over, right? Confirmed atheists, lock on, lads. Right, so maybe we should do a hybrid approach, right? Economics and economics
Okay.
and
Okay,
and theism.
let's I'm trying to roll back here on the chat. Um
Just use your finger. It's an
oh yeah,
iPad
no,
there. You
no,
just
I'm just looking kind of at the inflation. Um so what was this the one I brought up before? I think it was. Yeah, Daniel, be a good. I'll put you in the host seat, and since you're such a great speaker, read that question so I can then answer the question.
I don't want your opinion. I just want your silky smooth voice.
All right.
All right. This one's coming from Alpinism Utilitar. Okay. I like the display of unemployment and credit. It is interesting that it also overlaps with the misery index and the cycle of mortgage interest rates that become negative or positive leverage. Ty,
Right.
what do you think?
Right. So the misery index, as I recall, although it's not used that often, is a blend between the unemployment rate and the inflation rate added together. So neato. I do like that overlay as well, and that's something I'll look at. Um, Now, as for the question, does global now here's the argument I get on Twitter a lot, and I should just stay off Twitter. Is you have your neoclassical mainstreamers, and you have the heterodox, and within the heterodox, you have your post Keynesians, you have your MMTers, and even the Austrians might put themselves in the heterodox, even though I think they're just a bunch of mainstreamers. When I look at the inflation of the 1970s, it's not caused by printing money. It was caused by oil shocks, so external shocks. So you have exogenous variables in a system. Now, those are variables outside of the system you're looking at, and then you have endogenous variables within this system. So the system actually influences those variables. So when I talk that the oil shocks came from outside, that's exogenous. And that is kind of what I'm referring to as global unrest. And we saw a lot of inflation 70s and into the 80s. We're seeing inflation now. And when I put out the poll this morning, one of the things that was in the back of my mind is there's a lot of blame going on that the government spent a lot, and it caused demand to increase, blah 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 blah. The data doesn't actually support that. Where consumption's just getting back to pre-COVID levels, so it doesn't even support that. So my idea in my mind, what's really driving inflation? Well, COVID, supply chain, external, war in Ukraine, external. And so my theory, as I'm putting together quite a large model right now, my goal is to develop a model that first year undergrad students could use, or a lecturer could show the basic qualitative effects of pulling levers in the economy. Now, that could be the central bank buying bonds from the private sector. Um, it could be the central bank changing the policy rate. It could be government spending. It could be private interest rates. what do those things do qualitatively in a large system? And I'm not trying to get quantitative numbers. My opinion with complex systems, which the economy is you can never really truly quantify it. You can do momentum analysis. So if the economy or certain variables moving in a particular direction, you can extrapolate where that's going to go into the future. But you can only do that in the short term. But what I want to do is really track with system dynamics. That's the tool I use. What the qualitative effects are on different things in the economy. And right now I'm working on inflation. So is the current bout of inflation from civil unrest, or is it because we printed a bunch of money during COVID? And I argue a bunch of that printing really a lot of it sits as excess reserves in the banking system, and reserves in the banking system, that is used to settle between accounts. So reserves aren't lent out to the general public, nor do loans that you get, mortgages and whatnot, they are not dependent on the reserves that the bank holds. The bank can simply create credit for you on demand if they see that you'll pay it back and you'll pay interest. That's how they work. It is a product for them. So when they create a loan, they create an asset on, they create a loan asset on the asset side of their ledger, and they create a deposit liability on the other side of the ledger, and it balances out to zero. So the reserves are simply used for, so if you buy something from a firm and that firm uses a different bank than you use, what happens is your bank marks down your deposit account. At the end of the night, your bank has reserves, and those reserves are held at an account at the central bank. And all banks have an account at the central bank, and it differs from country to country. So at the end of the night, you've spent, and to a firm that has a bank, a different bank, your bank will send reserves to that firm's bank overnight, and then that firm will mark up or that bank will mark up the firm account. Deposits that each bank create do not go from bank to bank. It is a product of that individual banking company. The reserves are what banks use to exchange. Reserves are also used in the transactions between banks and the central bank and the government spending. So when the government spends, the central bank marks down their TGA account and then marks up the bank where they're spending in the economy. That bank gets the reserves. And let's say the government spent on buying wood from a lumber store, and the bank has the account for that lumber store. The bank just simply marks up and creates deposits. That's how it works. So I've kind of digressed here. Yes, go Minsky. Use Minsky. By the way, people download Minsky. It's free and it's fun to use. You'll learn system dynamics. You'll learn causal effects. You can learn accounting, which mainstream economics completely ignores. Completely ignores. And in fact, a lot of heterodox economists completely ignore it as well. And here we got another one from Olivia. Inflation comes from the fact that the economy works on consumption, not production. My view always that it should be investment, production, consumption, credit, but at the limit. Debt, credit issues. We have so many questions coming in. I don't even know how to address that, but it sounds valid.
I think Steve would agree with that. If I'm reading that correctly, I think Steve would really agree with that.
Let me ponder this. Inflation comes from the fact that the economy works on consumption, not production. Okay. I don't know if other people do this, but sometimes when you read something, you put your own conceptual text around the actual line that you're reading. So I think I agree. We're a consumption focused economy, and that's where inflation can be derived from. versus production. But
Oh, right.
Dan, actually, what's your opinion? Kind of in the context of what is inflation, and I'm not talking. We have normal 2% inflation, and that's simply because our capitalistic economy functions on we create credit for people to build projects that we use in the future. So our money supply is always expanding slightly faster than our productive capabilities. So we see minor inflation, and under normal circumstances, between 1% and 3%, we all operate fine. But right now we're in slightly higher inflation. Is this a monetary issue, or is this external, like wars in Ukraine? Are we reaching constraints on this planet that we're now starting to see? And we should probably expect higher inflation or bouts of higher inflation in the future, in the coming decades. What's your opinion? Coming from a non-economic standpoint, coming from an individual living out there.
Well, I mean, as a philosopher, I'm highly interested in economics. I just, like you had said earlier, I put my own contextual framing on things, and I don't dig as deep mathematically into economics. I think I actually ask tougher questions, foundational questions. So let me kind of give an interpretation of inflation the way I see it as a global phenomenon from 2023, what we're experiencing now. I would say that the global disruption around COVID had a lot to do with our current situation. I don't. This is just how I'm viewing the overall or the overall conditions, economic conditions that the world is facing. We had a perturbation to the system. It shook things up, and the momentum that we had for business as usual was scaled back in almost every industry around the world. I think that trying to get back to business as usual, and I'm using a little bit of a pejorative term that has a resonance within a climate community, getting back to business as usual is something that's a little more difficult to do. That coupled with, I think, portions of the population that decided to move on, change careers, or possibly even retire. These have been key drivers of the actual events. Now I want to talk about the speculative aspects of inflation that are driving inflationary numbers. Consumer confidence, runaway spending, and fiscal policy. These are things that are driving inflation and actually have a feedback loop that increase the runaway rate of inflation. I would say. To what point? Until society is really hurting. I think that's kind of the way it is. We don't know how to slow an economy in any other way than through fiscal monetary policy, and those are the rules that the governments play by. So the hope that I would like to see, I have a basic understanding of MMT, and I would like to see I'd like to see MMT become the silver bullet approach that can solve a lot of things for a lot of people and get us on the right track very quickly. So that's how I would frame it. That's how I perceive it. What do you think? What are your thoughts?
I think that's actually very intelligent for somebody that doesn't come. I shouldn't say that about you, because I think you're actually quite in touch with economics, being around Steve now for 2 years. So I agree completely with your interpretation there. We have a lot of great. Now remember, comment past Dan's head. Keep the comments coming in. And I would like to elaborate. I do like Dan's facial hair. If
Oh,
I
you
could
do?
if I could grow a beard like that, I would. I think it would make me look older and more mature, and people would actually listen to me. I think at this point, what do I look? Maybe around 29. Let's say 29. I look around 29, so people don't listen to me. It's only when I start to grow.
He's actually 54. We call him Benjamin, but Benjamin Button, or is that that a movie where Brad Pitt aged in reverse?
Oh, and so I see Dan has put up. Do you want to join us? If you do have the courage, you can come join us live. You can
It'll
come
take
on.
courage. We're gonna rip you to shreds.
Yeah, we will
We're gonna
rip you to
destroy you.
destroy. You can come on if you want to. If you don't want to, just keep chatting on the in the little telephone that I made. But you're more than welcome, considering this is kind of at this point a bonus episode. Okay, here is
Yeah, MMT is a silver bullet. I can't help but think it is the silver bullet.
so I'd like to hear you guys I'd like to hear your guys' take on something and relating to the idea of MMT as a silver bullet. Hasn't post-Keynesian economics basically ruined itself with green growth assumptions that are replaced? I know it's really hard to type fast on YouTube, so I'm only reading the way you type it. So let me try to.
Wait, Led, before we get into that, I really want to address somebody like Andrew who said, will Simon Michaud be on this? We don't know when people are coming in. No, Simon had technical difficulties. We're moving him forward for 1 month, and he's going to come in the first week of March, tentatively. That's the schedule right now. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
That would be March 4th. Just so we'll just elaborate on that. Next week we have Phil Dobby, which many of the Steve fans here know who Phil Dobby is. He does a podcast with Steve. The following week we are going to have Rob Johnson, who runs, I think it's called the New Economics. Dan, what is the organization he runs? INET. So he'll be on in 2 weeks. And then we have Steve Grumbine, who does the Macro and Cheese podcast in 3 weeks. Then Simon will be back. We had to kind of juggle it around because we're already booked in advance. So to the question, hasn't the post-Keynesian economics basically ruined itself? Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, economics has slept on MMT, and it's really done itself a disservice because MMT at its core, and I know we hear comments like the job guarantee, taxes don't fund spending, and a lot of the cliche talking points from MMT. But what it comes down to at its core is stock flow consistency. Now, people give credit to Warren Mosler as the father of MMT, and I would agree. Warren Mosler is brilliant. But somebody before him who Mosler studied under was Wynne Godley. And Wynne Godley, though he got some things wrong, he was into stock flow consistent modeling. And post-Keynesians, to a degree, fail on really taking up that method. I'm not saying all do, and obviously the mainstream fails completely. They don't even include money in their models. So the mainstream, Ben Bernanke, simply says money doesn't matter because when you get a loan from the bank, it's from another depositor. Obviously, that's not the case. And in 2014, the Bank of England published a paper stating that banks indeed create an asset on their which is a loan on their ledger, and simultaneously they create the deposit, which is a liability, which balances double entry bookkeeping, and there are fundamental laws you can't change. So yes, to answer your question, post Keynesians have done themselves a disservice.
Wait, can I just make a comment on that?
Did you put this question? Sorry, I'm clicking buttons.
Yeah, I put Andrew. Simon had some technical difficulties today because when I respond in the chat, then if it's from Steve Keen's channel, then
Oh, I see. I actually go, hello. I actually go right to the channel and then I type with my account. So I know, yeah. So I've got this on my other screen, and that way people know it's me and it's not Steve. Just for your information, guys, if we chat from our interface here, we just come up as Steve Keen, and Steve is not here right now, though he is watching comfortably in his studio apartment in London, trying to fix his new computer or get it working.
Are you sure about that? Is he really watching?
Absolutely. Why wouldn't he watch Dan
there's
and
nothing.
Todd? There's nothing better to do on. Now, this would be on a Saturday evening for him because he's in London. But what else would you want to do in the United Kingdom right now than watch two Canadians on the other side of the world talk? I couldn't think.
Yeah, about economics.
About economics and beards.
And beards, yeah, gray beards. I mean, what do you think about? So you put me on the spot when it came to economics. So Ty, I want you to tell me the difference between a gray beard and a green beard. What would you say the difference is between those two?
Well, so this goes back, the theory, it goes back, and the difference is a green beard is usually derived from Irish people. So first and foremost, a green beard would indicate some sort of Irish descent. And I've read this in papers. And a gray beard just simply means you're old and over the hill. So I'm looking at your beard, and fortunately, I do see some Irish descent in there. Now, I don't know if that's just caused by our green backgrounds. I might have to make the assumption that's what it is. I also see some gray, and that may be a slight indication of being over the hill. Now, that's not a bad thing, Dan. That's just a different stage of life. So I don't know if that answers the question between green beards and gray beards and what relationship that has to economics, but I think I gave you a plausible response.
You're wrong. That's the point I was going to make. You're wrong for so many reasons. Green beards means that we recognize each other in some sort of similar fashion, right? So let's just say let's say we're Steve disciples, okay, learners of Steve. We learn from Steve. So we would be green bearders in that sort of, if we were lumped together in that sort of category, right? So even though you don't have a beard, when it comes to Steve Keen and friends, we're green beards. I'm critiquing MMT. It is post-Keynesian. I'm saying MMT policy is to increase growth to restore output and employment, but we have growth and not climate. We can't have growth and not climate. That's what I thought it was. I thought.
So we have a similar question, actually, that we were going to get Steve to address from another viewer that doesn't usually watch live. And they mentioned the same thing. For the sake of the environment, shouldn't we discourage government deficit spending, especially during recessions, to contract the money supply and reduce GDP? If we ultimately have to resort to a degrowth wartime economy, it would be better to start now. So that's a valid. So I'll bring up that question again if I can find it. So basically, botched Mandela is saying that MMT policies actually promote growth when we should be promoting climate mitigation things. So I actually had a conversation with Steve during the week about this because it's an interesting concept. Um, if the government takes the opportunity to spend, and MMT says it can spend when it needs to spend, and employs that spending on climate mitigation tools, uh, that would be worthwhile. So, well, the private sector isn't spending as much. And what does the private sector do? We all kind of look out for ourselves and we contribute to climate change. The government can fill that gap with climate mitigation policy spending um, items, whether that's into solar panels or whatever you think is feasible to reverse the direction of CO2 emissions. So I'm kind of the opinion that it's dependent on the type of government spending. If it's just willy-nilly government spending to fill the gap so we have a job guarantee, then yeah, it actually might mask the problem that we're destroying the planet. Um, but if it's targeted spending and that it's insightful and there are people within the government and hopefully some scientists that are saying this is what we should be spending on during this recessionary gap, this is what you need to do. I think actually government spending is needed to solve the problem. Um, but like I said, there's a fine line, or actually quite a thick line, between government spending that just contributes to the problem of climate change and government spending that's addressing the problem of climate change. So it's a complex kind of answer to that. What do you think, Dan?
I've been trying to make sense of it myself in from a philosophical framework, and it's more like an ideal future state, which is something that philosophers kind of get in trouble with. I mean, if you look at all of the upside and the benefit of Plato and his insight into the emergence of our Western culture as we know it. I mean, that's how significant he was. The Republic was his best framing and masterpiece of the way a government should be. Now, there's a lot of things that would rub people the wrong way in the Republic, but I'm not going to get into that. I think the tendency for the human mind to try and imagine a government state that is ideal is a very powerful and useful method for us to work together. Okay. Now, what would that look like? Now, when I frame what this would look like, I am in a similar perspective to Nate Hagen's on his podcast called The Great Simplification. So, although I don't like to use GDP as a metric for economic prosperity, we're stuck with it. That's why I refer to it as the atheist God. It is actually not atheist. It's everywhere. It's ubiquitous. There's no way around GDP in terms of how we perceive and move into the future of prosperity, whether I like it or not, whether there are alternative systems out there. GDP, we are stuck with it. I mean, we can't have a vote and say, let's get GDP out of the equation because we're still using it. Okay, so we have a model that focuses on production regardless. We have CO2 levels which are dangerously high and growing exponentially. So from a macro standpoint, that's my starting point as a philosopher. And I say, look, we need a whole lot less carbon going into the atmosphere. And where the conversation from environmentalists and scientists mostly point out, in my opinion, is that and just hold on a sec, Ty, because that I can't It's hard to concentrate with it.
This
I
is
want to
this
read those, right? I
no,
want to read those.
this is the voice of God, not for you. This is just me highlighting some of the great comments
Oh,
that
I see. Okay.
we might not get time to address, but I'm in the chat right now, kind of reading them. So I will try to address them on the side if we don't do it right in the show. So carry on, Mr. Sanderson.
Okay. So basically, I look at GDP is the issue. We're still focused around production, whether we like it or not. Now, if we were looking at a dramatic scale back of production, okay, we then would use something like MMT to fund these climate mitigation strategies. But one thing that's not looked at seriously enough in order to get democratic approval and buy-in from the populace is they need to know they're being taken care of. Now, up until now, there's been no social contract that says you're going to be taken care of, because the way you get taken care of is you go out and you produce. So, as far as I understand, the climate conversation doesn't go far enough. People need to understand that they're going to be taken care of. Okay. And I'm not saying a free ride. I'm saying they need to feel like they're not signing up for a version of Maoist China. This is the big scare feature that is prominent for people who are mostly found in the conservative camps that populate the propaganda that a decisive plan and action to mitigate climate and come into some sort of working equilibrium, right? I used a little bit working equilibrium to kind of emphasize the complexity of that dynamic system. If we're moving towards that, then we have to let people know that we're kind of moving away from the agreed social contract that everybody's grown up around. And it is pervasively libertarian. If you want to make a difference, if you want to achieve, if you need to save, you need to work hard, you need to, well, people did that. They've accumulated wealth, capital, properties, and their view is that all that's going to be taken away by the climate change people, right? So they look at it as this cancer. Well, why are they so in much opposition to these conversations? Why do they want the status quo? Because they view the alternative that comes from the climate change camp as an equivalent to Maoist China. How do you take away that fear? That's the question.
Interesting.
And if you can address that, and I want to make one thing. There was, I think it was a coal miner I read in an article that went to a big discussion about trying to reform the coal industry. And I think the coal worker just said, hey, guys, I'm fine with it. Just like, don't leave us behind. These are families. These are people that have played by the rules their entire life, generations. And so if a scientist or a climate scientist or somebody in the UN Council decides to say, hey, we're going to put this unilateral law in order to save humanity and prevent us from catastrophic failure, how are we going to feed people? Are we going to take away their property? How are we going to keep civility and order and prosperity? How are we going to do that? That's the missing side of the conversation that doesn't seem to be even on anybody's radar. Well, I've got the solution. That's my apologetic, because I think it's entirely compatible. I think you can actually lead a better life if you champion one that's worth living.
I agree. I agree. You're getting right into Star Trek here.
That's right.
Um,
And I will get, where is my not tricorder? What is that thing that you get to be beamed up with? What was that?
Your communicator?
Mike, well, I want to tell the guy on the transporter he should be beaming me up.
You do raise an interesting, there's a whole nother side of the story. And one thing you did point out there at the very end is we all need to kind of adjust. And I don't know if it's possible in this day and age, but instead of living for ourselves, live for society. And I know that's counterintuitive, where we're taught that we should do things that make us happy in our own hearts, but that's been commercialized in a lot of ways. And what we need to do, and then the Star Trek kind of aura, is that everybody then at that point in time is doing things for the betterment of society as a whole, and that brings them happiness. And there's so many different angles to climate change that is missed in the normal discussion. And before you go there, Dan, I want to tell everybody, make sure you hit the like button, and make sure after the show you comment. What did you like about the show? What do you want to see changed? That really helps the algorithm. If you're watching on Twitter, make sure you like and retweet. Dan, what were you going to say?
It's a slippery slope, Ty. I mean, there's some wisdom there that I really want to just add as perspective philosophically. If we sit and we look at a public, I mean, imagine, okay, so we've got 14 eyeballs. Okay, that's concurrently what and how many people are actually watching this live broadcast. Let's assume for a minute that I could have everyone in the world actually watch this broadcast right now at this moment.
Hold on. This is the voice
YouTube.
from above. We actually we actually exceed the currently on YouTube. We have 14 viewers. We have 11 right now on Twitter, and I just want to acknowledge the people watching on Twitter. Thanks for joining in. Dan did not forget about you, and we love you. Anyways, Dan, continue.
25. Okay, so we're going to go in this imaginary thought experiment. We're going from 25 to the entire world. Okay, now get technical. I mean, people that have the ability to actually watch a YouTube channel. Okay, let's just say that that's what it is. So Ty made this comment and said, you know what, we need to stop thinking about ourself so individualistically and think a little bit more about others. Okay, now sounds great. It really does. It really does. However, I think it plays right into the hands of the best and the worst of religion. We already have institutions that really play that card to the max. And one thing that I would like to point out is that we are individualistic by nature, and overlooking that can be the source of our peril and revolution and a lot of, let's just call it social problems. So on the surface, yes, I agree that if everybody just approached their day-to-day, their week-to-week, and their lives for the greater good, we run into a whole bunch of definition problems. We have a difficult way to draw the line. And I'm saying keep it a lot simpler than that. Make it beneficial for an individual so that individuals will vote for a better life. And I think that as things get tougher and tougher for the average person, if democracies are going to prevail, we'll demand more from the governments, and that's where MMT will come in. Do you realize that an average retired person, someone that's not living on massive equity and massive income, can live a fairly simple life on a very limited budget? In fact, there's a word for it in the community. I live on a fixed income. Now, can we make the assumption that Retired people who live on a fixed income have an issue living, thriving, succeeding, loving. Come on, guys. This is the time to slow down. They slow down from their families. They enjoy, they pick up a hobby, they do things that they wouldn't have normally done. That's the time. That's the new phase that we need to move into. Okay. And I think that carbon intensive activities are going to cost a lot. Walking your dog in the park, having dinner at home with friends and family. Come on, guys. That's necessity. We can have a whole lot more of that. That's what I suggest. What do you guys think?
What do you guys think? There is a lot of chats going on here. I like it. I like people having a conversation on the side. That's what I wanted to see, having this system. So that's really good. I want to kind of switch gears a little bit here, and I want to talk about MMT. We're going to have MMT guests on in the future. We just haven't gotten to it yet. There's so many guests out there. If it's climate science, philosophy, there's so many different topics out there in the world. We haven't gotten to MMT. And I want to talk a little bit about MMT and some of the things out there. And one of the things is, does taxes fund government spending? Now, this is going to my statements that I make here after are probably going to be not MMT. I shouldn't say friendly. Taxes. When you look at the national accounts and you look at bank ledgers, taxes do indeed go. So when you pay a tax, your bank marks down your account. Let's say it's income tax, and we'll be abstract here. It gets taken off your paycheck depending on what country you're in. Your bank just marks down the account where those taxes come off. Okay, and it is no longer deposit money. It is destroyed, like MMT says. The next process is at the end of the day, the bank's reserve account goes down because of payment of those taxes. And what the central bank is doing is doing a liability swap. So the central bank has in its liability columns all the banks under it and a government account. What it's doing is moving the reserves from the bank into the government account. So this is where the argument, and I'm an MMT supporter, just to put it out there. I think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. I think it's a necessity. But it does indeed, your tax dollars in the form of reserves do get transferred into the central, or the TGA, which is the account that the central bank holds for the treasury. That money doesn't disappear. It does get spent back into the economy. What MMT is saying is the government has the ability to expand the money supply via reserves. So during, let's say, COVID, and it differs from country to country, they want to do massive spending programs. What happens is they are spending beyond taxes, so the Treasury releases bonds. The banking sector, the primary dealers, which are in the banking sector, buy those bonds with the reserves they have. If they don't have enough reserves, what happens, and this is why the central bank steps in, the central bank steps in and buys bonds that the banking sector has been holding. And what that does is it creates reserves, more reserves. So now the banks can use those reserves to buy the newly issued treasury bonds. That is the technical process of money creation and what MMT states. neoclassical and mainstream economics uses that argument against mainstream, showing that bonds are sold. So it can't be that the government spends first and tax later and bonds later. They call that tabs and stabs, is these hypotheses. So one says that the government needs to tax and put out bonds first and then spend, and the other is the government spends first, and that creates the reserves, creates deposits in the economy, and those are used for taxes later on. It's a complicated process. And so what I just spelt out there is what truly happens. And MMT, this is the one part where I don't like that the leaders, and I'll choose my words carefully here, like to aggregate both the central bank and the treasury into one. There are separate processes happening there, and I think it'll serve MMT to make sure you disaggregate the central bank from the treasury. Now, here's the thing. The central bank wouldn't be in business very long if they didn't do what the government said to do. The government says we're going to spend. Okay, central bank marks up the appropriate bank accounts or banks in the economy. The banks, of course, then mark up the specific deposit accounts. That is a true fact. But it is very important to understand that central banks do play a critical role in our monetary system. And I wanted to kind of clarify that because that's often an issue of debate on Twitter and other social media platforms of who is right. And MMT is right. They can create money out of nothing, but there's a process with the central bank and how it's done. So the in most countries, the government account by law cannot go negative, and it gets a little more extreme in the states. They have a debt ceiling, which is another self-imposed constraint. Well, there is a self-imposed constraint in almost every country where the government account cannot go negative. There are exceptions. In England, during COVID, the central bank gave the government's account an overdraft, so it was allowed to go negative. So under the assumption that your government account can't go negative, if they don't have enough taxes to balance the spending, they have to sell bonds. And that's what happens in the United States. That's what's happens in Australia, Canada, Japan. If the banking sector does not have enough reserves to buy all those new issued treasuries and bonds, there's an issue. And this is where the central bank steps in. The banking sector is holding a massive amount of treasuries and bonds, which they make money on. They make more money off the interest from bonds and treasuries than they do holding reserves that the central bank pays interest on. So what this is a backwards manipulation, you could say. The central bank says, okay, you don't have enough reserve to buy all those treasuries. We're going to give you reserves in exchange for the assets. And those assets, of course, were past created treasuries. And that gives the banks more reserves. That is the act of creating money, how the government creates first. It's a little more technical, and I think it'll serve MMT better to really address those technical areas, because if they never do, the mainstream comes in with their techno battle and says, well, no, wait a minute, it's the central bank making the money. They're buying treasuries, so treasuries and bonds and taxes fund first, right? But if MMT were to address those technical aspects, they can literally shoot down any mainstream economist that tries to defame MMT, because MMT is correct. It is a bunch of balance sheets all interlocking together. And if you use a software program, which I use, which is Minsky, created by Steve Keen and Russell Standish, you can plot all that out yourself. You don't have to have any mathematical dynamics. You can literally take a godly table, put it on your canvas, what represents the treasury, one for the central bank, one for firms, one for banks, one for private individuals, do all the assets, liabilities, so they balance to zero at the end, get your equity, and you can see MMT is right. But that was just a something I see on Twitter, and I've always really wanted to address that there is a technical process, and aggregating the Treasury and the central bank may be a mistake. Is Dan the man still with us?
Absolutely, my friend. And I'm thinking we need to keep digging into that because it's actually a really important question. And you may have heard it here first with Ty to say this is what is needed by the champions of MMT. We need to figure out how do you bridge those conversations between the naysayers and trying to make meaningful difference, because I think it's a silver bullet. I think it's a and like for anybody that says we don't need silver bullets, da 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 da. This is lore. It's for werewolves and all. Come on, okay, all right. Let me be more specific. This is really a derivative of our knowledge of economics and our knowledge of how money works and our knowledge of our cumulative knowledge of money creation and economic systems. And I think we overlook it at our peril. I shouldn't say that. That's too doomsday. We can lose a lot of prosperity if we don't pay attention to that. And it could be as bad as our peril if the climate reality unfolds the way it quite possibly could.
So here is Wesley. I really actually love Wesley. He's around on social media. He promotes our show, and I knew my explanation there would elicit some emotional response. So I just want to read this. So I get the bonds are state debt and are already counted in the broader savings and loans, I believe S&L stands for. So when bonds get turned into reserves or reserves get turned into bonds, nothing changes at the macro level, just from just the form of government debt. And Wesley is correct in saying that. But here's the thing: if we don't actually spell out the process of how that happens, we will never break the mainstream's hold on the public's mind that the government is exactly the same as a household. We need to really spell out the technical circles that we do, because that's what it is, right? When the government creates money, it's a kind of a circle. The banking sector doesn't have enough reserves to buy bonds. Okay, so the central bank comes in and buys some of the pre-existing bonds in the private sector from the banks and gives them reserves. There's the act of money creation, right? And then the banks take those reserves, and this is the big circle, and they buy the higher earning interest treasuries and bonds. Without describing that circular process, and I know Stephanie Kelton and Warren Mosler, they do, but it's pushed down to below the level where it's just the really hardcore MMTers like myself or Wesley, and many others that I'm just not can't think of the names right now. It gets pushed below the surface, and only we see that. What we want is MMT to be acknowledged by the greater, wider society, and it's not. It does have a very good cult following, and that's what it needs to expand and grow as a movement. But there are technical aspects that we need to really tie together so we can present to the general public and see how they're being fooled by the whole process. That it's just a circle jerk game between the banking sector, the central bank, and the government. That is what and so I'm not speaking on that. The technical aspects aren't acknowledged by MMTers. I think MMTers are probably, even MMTers that aren't economists, I think are smarter than people like Ben Bernanke. They have more in-depth knowledge about the monetary system than some of the elites in the Economic Society, and I'll pick on Ben Bernanke because he's an idiot. I'll even no, I won't pick on him because he says he's post Keynesian. His first name is Paul. I won't say his last name, but sometimes I wonder if he's a mainstreamer too. Larry Summers. Those people those people will always pick apart the MMT perspective or the MMT lens because we're not putting out that concise technical statement to the general public, where the general public can be like, no, this is just a circle jerk going on. The CB is creating the reserves for the banking sector to buy the treasuries. And so that act comes from government spending. Government spending comes first, then taxing and bonds. It's just as simple as that. And I'm not saying I'm the one that's going to come up with that argument. There are smart people in the MMT community that would blow me away with their knowledge. But what I am saying is we do need to address that technical aspect between the central bank and the treasury and the different dynamics between the two. So I'm really enjoying the chat. I'm going to point my finger. This here, my finger disappears because of the screen. This here, I'm loving this. I love the great conversation going on. If you disagree with me, you disagree with Dan, you disagree with Steve, go ahead and say it, right? As long as you're not trolling and being, having derogatory comments. I actually like constructive criticism. That's where I've learned. There was a time that I didn't believe in MMT. I believed in the loanable funds model. Because that's what I read in textbooks. That's what I saw on the news. And that's how I learned. And when I put that out there, either on social media, and the odd person would come up and critique me, and it was constructive, and sometimes it hurts. I was like, there might be something here. And that's how I learned. So I love the chat going on. I'll do the finger thing here. I'll move over to the phone. This, great stuff here. I'm becoming a real podcaster. Dan, are you there, buddy?
I love it too. I think it's really well. Okay, so let's talk about the aesthetics of it just a little bit. So I think it's doable just the way it is. There's a little bit of a square box that overshadows it just a little bit. Graphically, I don't know how to really fix that. You might be able to tweak it just stretch it just a little bit on the left side, a little bit, but
yeah.
Maybe.
Hey, Douglas has joined us, and that's the name of the channel I was trying to remember. It's MMT Macro Trader. Great show. What day do you usually do that, Douglas? Just so I can tell people. Is it a Wednesday? I can't remember. Let us know in the chat, and I'll put it up on the screen. It's a great 3-hour show. It's if you're into economics, or pardon me, if you're into MMT, and you just want to kind of explore the subject of MMT, it's a free-flowing show. The guys, Biggio and Douglas, they interact with the chatters. That's where I kind of go and hide out. I have a few select podcasts I do. I don't do the big Joe Rogan. I don't watch Joe Rogan podcasts. I very rarely watch Lex Friedman podcasts. I stick to the very small guys because that's where you're going to get the real information. And Douglas is doing a lot of great work with Granger's statistical analysis. You'll see his tweets on Twitter. It's good stuff. And here we go. Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern, MMT Macro Trader. Check out his show. Thanks, Douglas, for popping in and saying hello. So, yeah, that was kind of my rant on MMT and how we need to kind of address those more technical standpoints. But by no means, and this is where I get really nervous about bringing up those things, because MMTers are attacked so much by the mainstream that they're very leery when somebody suggests something that could be changed. And I've faced that quite a few times by making comments that somehow I was anti-MMTer, and I was distorting the facts. And all I'm doing is highlighting ways that we can get MMT out to the greater population, where there is not the ability by people like Larry Summers, Ben Bernanke, and even the post-Keynesian Paul Krugman to attack it on technical issues, because we're not addressing those technical issues. So, Dan, come on back on. Get in here, Dan.
Okay.
Where you go? Stop hiding. So, Dan, where do you stand? And we've covered this a few times before. But as like we kind of already discussed, you're kind of on the periphery of economics. Your understanding, and try to drop what you've learned from Steve over the last couple of years and any of our conversations, and just with an intelligent mind, when you look at economics and you hear the word MMT, as an average citizen, and I don't mean to put you in the average column, but just to get a reaction, what do you think MMT is? And there is no right or wrong answer. This is kind of an exercise, the average person's opinion.
Well, I want to say that it's kind of like a, even though the explanation, the lead up is not going to sound like the average person, I'm going to draw similarity to how the neurons fire in our brain. So in order for an action potential to fire, or for it to burst through the threshold, you need a significant amount of neural activity for it to break through those thresholds. And I think that for most people, MMT is not on the radar. And so let's say that there's a group of people where it's not on their radar, and I say MMT and they think it's like a McDonald's Happy Meal. Okay. So what would I say to somebody like that? And I would say, how would you bring that up to them? Because I'm not at that level. I can't even begin to explain it, but I could have some family members that might be in a similar situation. They're like, I don't, MMT, what are you talking about? And I'd say, well, do you realize that the government can print money? Like, I don't know which way to explain it. They can print money, and they can pay for programs. They can make our society better. And the only thing that they have to worry about is out of control inflation. So someone can be like, okay, I kind of get what you're saying, but I don't really get how inflation works. And it's all over the news. And I know that shit costs more. So I don't know what to do with that. That's something that the experts should be able to handle. That's kind of the mental process, I think. If I push a person like that into further conversation, it's kind of like, well, you have things you like to think about and do, and I have things that I like to think about and do. So go and do MMT, economic, philosophical stuff. Go ahead and do that. But for me, it doesn't make a lot of sense. All I know is that this idea of having responsibility in our government is something that resonates with me. And now, just so everybody's clear, this isn't me per se. This is the individual that I'm talking through. They're saying, that kind of makes sense if the government would just handle their finances like I have to handle my personal finances. Like, when I don't have money in the bank account, I can't spend it. If I have debt, I got to manage that debt. I can't just spend without consequence. So there's fundamentally something that people agree with in that. Okay, that's not the entry level. I think that would be, I'd say, like entry level, general sort of public sort of understanding. Then there's people that have heard about MMT and they say, oh yeah, right, that MMT stuff is just another liberal ploy to be able to do this and blah, 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 and let the liberals spend as much as they want. Well, crap. How do I get out of that? Right? Because as soon as you open your bloody mouth, you're, being polarized into right or left. And I'm thinking, okay, so how do you take a strong stance on MMT, and educational stance on MMT, from a conservative standpoint. Is there such a person? I'd like to know. I really would like to know. Because I'm going to go back to the earlier point in this live stream where I said, we need to show the average person how this will benefit them. What will that do? VOTES. You will get votes. What will that mean for the average person? That's what you need to tell people. Will it drive up inflation? Find something that won't. Give them something tangible that will increase it will make sense for them. Money in their pocket. Great. How do you do that?
Yeah, I agree. One of the other things with MMT is its message, and I know this again is not intentional, but its message is taxes aren't used to fund the government. That's correct. But what people are hearing is you're going to tax me, and that's going to take money out of my pocket. So from the public's perspective, regardless of what the function of tax is for and the correct interpretation of it, which I agree with MMT, it doesn't need to fund spending because it doesn't. At the end of the day, it comes off your paycheck and it hurts. And the average person during times of inflation, and you know what, even when it's at 2%, right now the wage share of GDP has been going down since the 1970s. So it elicits an emotional response to people, a very deep emotional response that the government is taking something away from me. And when the MMT rhetoric is it's the government's in the first instance, so they're not taking anything away from you, without further describing the technical circle behind it, that elicits an emotional response that it immediately makes it a no-go for the individual. So I think, like Dan, you kind of mentioned that fact is what is going to touch on people's heart to draw them in. And you have brought up this guy. He's a conservative for a conservative party here in Canada. And he likes to speak on economics from a
He actually likes to speak with his eyes closed all the time. Look, I want to tell you guys, anybody that hasn't heard of this guy, he's incredibly charismatic. And we already Canadians have a charismatic prime minister, a young Justin Trudeau, a liberal. Okay. And I lean a little, I was telling somebody the other day, I said, I am a liberal with my head and I am a conservative with my feet. So that's how close I am to that central line of sensibility. I'd like to say it still is there. Why do I have 2 feet planted in a conservative world? Well, because there's a lot of it that kind of just simply makes sense. It's like good old fashioned hardcore working ethic values and so on and so forth, right? Okay. I won't get too much into that or too deep into that, but on the liberal side, I think it's a difficult position to argue from. It really is. Without putting your emotions forefront, which simultaneously makes the other side, the conservatives, feel like they're worthless pieces of crap. And they're like, wait a minute, no, we're not worthless pieces of crap. No, we do care about society. No, so they just flat out refuse that. And so anyways, the reason why I brought up Pierre in this instance is that he's a politician. He's the conservative you're going to want to vote for. You want to vote for him. I'm not saying that I'm going to vote for him, but you kind of want to vote for him. Why? Because he's charismatic. He's a good speaker. I just wish he would just have something better to say. I mean, he calls inflation just inflation. Justin, as in Justin Trudeau. Like, this is the guy that caused all the inflation. Where I'm thinking, do you not turn on the news worldwide and understand that this is a world phenomenon? So it feels like a really intelligent man who has the ability to tell the truth. Either he doesn't understand the truth, and so he's like, I really think it's the government that's caused the issues in Canada, or he realizes that inflation is a global issue right now. So why put it squarely on the backs of the prime minister? Why? Because votes. And there's something disingenuous about that. You want to vote for him. He's a great speaker. He can destroy the opposition. He can get Justin Trudeau tumbling on his feet and stumbling over his words. It's entertaining to watch. But man, pick your words, educate yourself, and realize that what you're saying isn't true. It's not accurate. It's playing to what people want to hear, and you're bringing out what politics shouldn't be. What could politics be? It could be you telling the truth. It could be you explaining what inflation actually is. But the sad reality is, maybe that just won't get him elected. So we play into ignorance. We tell the stories to the lowest common denominator so that they will give us votes. And I think there's a better way. So anyways,
keep that up. Is that video one of his spiels on just inflation, or is it just a picture of him with his eyes closed?
Look at this. I asked him 5 times, how much did Trudeau give high-priced insider friends at McKinsey? So McKinsey is a big consulting firm. Let's just play this little video. Tell me when to stop at any time. Here you go. And of course, sound is going to be right here.
Question. 5 times the last time he was in this house, he was unable to answer. Perhaps the number is too high to count, but this is a company that's engulfed in scandals in France, that helped kill people in the United States and possibly in Canada through the opioid crisis, and helped foreign governments suppress their own people. Surely the Prime Minister would know how much he paid this company after 8 years. How much?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister. As these contracts were, for the large part, signed and negotiated by the public service, it's important that we actually be able to have clarity on the answers, which is why I've asked the Minister of Public Services and the President of the Treasury Board to look in carefully to make sure that Canadians did get value for money and that all the rules and procedures were appropriately followed. The ministers, of course, will be sharing that information with committees and with all parliamentarians. It's important that Canadians see exactly how government is investing their money.
I would like to see them in a boxing ring, actually.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
He says that the public servants recruited McKinsey and its managing director, Dominic Barton. Well, that's not what he said before. And I quote, "I met the leaders of major corporations from around the world, and one thing they all had in common. They all knew Dominic. I came to appreciate, maybe even envy, Dominic's contact list. So I recruited him, far from having public servants do it. In fact, public servants say they have no idea what McKinsey actually did for all this money. So given that he recruited this company, how much did he pay them?"
The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, over our time in office, I have been touched by seeing how many Canadians of extraordinary backgrounds have put their hands up and offered to serve their country, to contribute to Canadian success and contribute to governments. And Dominic Barton has certainly served his country in many ways, including by being an outstanding ambassador to China. In regards to...
I think that's enough of that, but you guys get the point.
Yeah, so... Here's just to give you context, McKinsey is used by every government across the planet. And the Conservative, I don't want to say his name because I don't want him to win. Daniel can say his name.
Pierre.
Pierre. Pierre would use, if he were to be in power, would use McKinsey as a consulting company. They're the only ones to use by government. So that argument there it's null and void. I will say he is captivating. For liberals should be afraid of that man. versus the last two conservative leaders. They didn't stand a chance against a united front from the NDP. And the NDP in Canada is our left-leaning federal party, and our Liberals are, tell me if you disagree, Dan, but more to the center left. And then obviously Conservatives here are to the right. The last few candidates of the Conservative Party didn't really stand a chance against a kind of combined NDP Liberal force. But this time, this Pierre guy, he can fight in Parliament. As you just saw there, he can speak very well. He's very captivating. But what he says is utter bullshit.
Yeah, I think so.
So, yeah.
And scary. And I think that the general public is buying into this crap because they see, they feel uncertainty, and they are captivated by a charismatic leader that's going to tell them that it's somebody's fault and they can help them point a finger. Now, the other thing that's concerning to me is that I think it's like the time frame discounting that we do, right? Like we discount things over time, and I think, you know, it's like we're, for a period of time, 8 years, we were a conservative run government, right? And then we get sick of that, and then we're a liberal run government, and then we get sick of that, and then we're a conservative run government, right? So years ago, Tommy Douglas, he's a Canadian, famous Canadian socialist. Ooh, socialist Americans, be careful, socialism. No, we're not living in Mao's China here. Basically, he brought in healthcare, and he advocated for a lot of really cool things that makes me proud to be Canadian. But anyways, basically what's going on here is that Tommy Douglas called them like the two cats. Like, we're the mice, and we're just like, well, we want that cat, and then we want that cat, and then we want that cat, and then we want that cat. And it never goes anywhere other than one cat getting fat, and then another cat getting fat, and they're just switching back between cats. So enough of this cat and mouse game. How do you make a political system that truly serves the people? How do you do that? And you know what? That comes from the people. So come on, guys, tune in. This is where you heard it first. This is where you heard it first. And I think we'll even hear it from the voice.
The voice of God. I've got chats here. I just got to pull this down. It's interesting, actually. Dan mentioned the cycle between, and you see this in almost every country, the cycle between liberalism and conservatism, and how it goes through. Down in the States, we'll use, because it's seen everywhere across the news, everywhere around the world. You have this cycle of Democrats and then the cycle of Republicans. And it actually resembles, in complex systems and system dynamics, the predator-prey model. And the predator-prey model, you may have heard it, we'll use fish and sharks, right? Sharks go up in population, and we'll call the sharks the liberals, just so I'm being fair here. They go up and they eat more fish, which are conservatives. So the conservatives go down. As the fish decline in population, the sharks don't have anything left to eat, so they start to decline. As the sharks decline, they're eating less fish, and the fish have an opportunity to grow again. That is what our political climate looks like to me, and not just in the States, but in Canada, Australia, the UK, Japan, even to smaller degrees like China. Now, there seems China, there is a suppression there because they have a ruling party, but you see the ebbs and flows there of discontent, and we're seeing some discontent in China right now. So I often, I think it was Warren Mosler did a tweet yesterday with some graph, some economic data, and he put Bush's name at one point in the data, and it fit with the line, and then he put Obama's name, and then he put Trump's name, and then he put Biden's name, right? And when I looked at that graph, I saw the predator-prey model. I wasn't even looking at the economic data. I think it was correlated with many other things, or there were causal effects outside of the names of these past presidents. But what I did see was that ebb and flow between, and to transfer the predator prey model to reality. What it is you see it with famous personalities. We love to put somebody on a pedestal and then break them down, and then the next person comes in. There's that predator prey dynamic. You could really see it with Obama, right? He came out with a political message of hope and change, and America, and even to the world to a degree, put him on this pedestal, the first African American president. And it was this very, very nice story. And I think I'm glad I got to witness that, because it was an historic moment. But he was quickly torn down. Right? People started feeding on it, and it's a mathematical dynamic you can model, and it's frightening, because it seems like we're falling into that trap of that predator prey model with our political left and right every 8 years, 10 years, where we do this growth and this decline, and what it's creating is a bunch of lame duck leaders. They can't do anything, right? There's division, right? I don't know how we get to a place where we can drop those political lines of left and right and see a charismatic leader, whether in Canada's case it's Pierre or Trudeau, and just get behind him to make society a better place as a whole, instead of looking out for our own individual ideologies.
Well, back in the United States, there was a podcast that I listened to with Brett and Heather Hang, and when they were really focused on politics, Brent came up with a system. Brent, he's the podcast host of the Dark Horse, Brent Weinstein, and he came up with like a 2-leader system. And so you have one from maybe right of center, left of center, and one takes a bit of a priority, but they actually work together to try and basically get shit done. And I mean, I would agree with that, unless there are any other fellow philosophers out there, and I'm not really a Hegelian, but if you put equity into the cycles in history, or even like a quasi-religious sort of like understanding that the forces need to be kept intact as defined entities, so that the opposition is what basically produces the truth. I mean, I don't know. It's so weird. It's like you'd think, well, just work together and get shit done. But there's some line of thinking that goes somewhat like this, and it's like, well, we need those two opposing opinions to constantly be pitted against itself in order for progress to happen, right? And it's like, it leaves you scratching your head going, okay, yeah, right, so let's have a dysfunctional family and not try and make it, because like that just makes sense, right? Wouldn't we want that? Like, let's try and not make it better. It's actually the imperfection that makes us all perfect. And it's like, what? I don't know. It just sounds ridiculous to me.
Everybody, make sure you're hitting that like button here on YouTube. After the show, make sure you comment about the show, what you liked, what you didn't like. We're kind of just going long here. We're almost through hour 2. It's just because people are, having a lively chat beside us, and I'll do the finger thing. I love this. Hold on. Here we go. Look at that. I love it. But make sure you just post something right after. It helps with the algorithm on our end, and it gives us some feedback. So if it's critical feedback, as long as it's not using violent words, because YouTube doesn't like that, we appreciate it, because we really, at the end of the day, it's what we want to give knowledge to people. And like I said, we usually have Steve and a guest on. That didn't happen. we want that to reach as many people as possible, right? And we want to make sure we do that in the right format that viewers enjoy, not just the way I think it should be, or the way Dan thinks it should be, or the way Steve thinks it, but how can we engage with you? Also, if you're on Twitter, make sure you like and retweet, and come over here and chat if you have a YouTube account. I don't know how much longer we're going to go. We're probably going to wrap it up at this point. But again, I'd like to say sorry we didn't have our main guests on today, but thank you for tuning in. It's been fun. Dan, I need you to come back on so we can kind of maybe say our goodbyes.
Well, what are they saying on the side? Like, I'm looking at that. Why are we not moderating the chat? Like, is this the criticism? Is that we're not talking to people? Like H, who says mod the chat. What are we like? I thought we were, right?
Yeah. So here's the thing: is you can say anything you want on the chat as long as it is not derogatory. So that means it is not against somebody's sex. It's not against somebody's race. It's not against somebody's personal character. Outside of that, you can say anything you want. We live in a free society, and I'm not. This was something I was concerned about, trolling. But at the same time, if you have a disagreement with what's being said by somebody on the show or somebody else in the chat, and it's respectful, I've got no problem with that going on.
Yeah, and if you're a troll and you're man enough to come on the show, then I'll post a link and then we'll destroy you. We'll turn you into a puddle of goo with our intellect. We'll tear you apart. If you're a troll and you got nothing better to do, come on the show. That's what we want. We want you to come on the show. Now's the time, because you can't when Steve's on, because he has no patience for that.
Yeah, we can put the link.
He'll just like de-bloke you to like oblivion, right? That's what he's going to do. He's going to be like, I don't get the time for this. And he'll drop some F-bombs and this and that. And hey, we're saying, come on right now. Come on, let's go.
That's the thing is too, is we have multiple methods we can do to deal with the situation. We can shadow ban you, so you can continue to type, but it's not going to come up on our feed. So you can continue to be on YouTube, or we can go directly on the channel and block you. But those are worst case scenarios. So we're not going to necessarily be moderating anything. We're going to be highlighting the comments, and even if they are contrary to what's being said, because I think that's part of the discussion, and any healthy discussion, that we accept opposing beliefs. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, you have an opposing belief. It's how you phrase it. How do you phrase it? Do you phrase it in a way that it can bring about conversation? Okay, I mean, for example, I know Ty. You know what? We could wrap the show up at any time, but I'm serious. Like, what if we took a hardline stance against MMT? How would we do that? I mean, in philosophy, you do this all the time. Like, how can I represent that argument? I mean, okay, let me try. Let's say the foundation of a non-MMT defense would be that we need fiscal responsibility. So somebody like Melanie Kelton, the author of Deficit Myth,
Stephanie Kelton. This is good. Melanie. This is good because so when I was asking Dan about his perception of MMT as an outsider from economics, this confirms that Dan is a philosopher and he focuses his interests in other areas. So this is really good when I'm able to ask Dan a question and refer it as a question to the general public who doesn't have an understanding. This is proof in the pudding. He just called Stephanie Kelton Melanie Kelton. That he is kind of outside of the economic realm. Carry on, Dan.
But the thing is it was I don't know, but like I read her book. I don't know. I just have those kind of blips. Anyways, if I'm defending the non-MMT position, I'm going to say that the fiscal responsibility model makes sense, and treating our economics and are treating government spending like a household budget is actually something that people understand. And for that reason alone, that's why we should do it. I mean, if I'm trying to bridge some sort of like integrated approach and say, not just say, no, MMT is a bunch of bullshit, right? I mean, I'd say, okay, I can see your point, but what about the practicality of having it implemented? What about the open ability for government to spend as much as they want? And I know they wouldn't, but it's new. There's not necessarily a check and balance in place to make sure that things are spent where they should be spent. And I think that's scary in times of economic uncertainty. And anytime something is scary and uncertain when it comes to economics, it gets people worried, especially if it comes from policy, top down. People, public don't like that. So that's how I would summarize it. For Melanie or for Stephanie?
Melanie Kelton.
Yeah, Melanie Kelton. She's going to love that. I mean, the previous instance of the show with Steve, we actually asked her to come on the show. Maybe it's because I called her Stephanie. She never responded to my email, Ty.
Or maybe we should get on Bill Mosler or Warren Mitchell. Oh wait, Warren Mitchell. Now, wasn't he a Celt? I'm mixing up names of famous MMTers on purpose. It would be actually good to have Mosler come on, because Mosler and Keane don't often mix well. Even though they're on the same team, it's actually quite interesting to watch them together. But yeah, my wife has returned home, so this is going to make it increasingly difficult to continue this podcast. So just a heads up.
And then Botch Mandela says, "This is why I made the is-ought distinction." Wow, right, philosophy. I want to bring more philosophy into this conversation.
I think philosophy is important, I think, in fostering good conversation. And the is and oughts, what ought to be in our world and what is in our world are often two different things, and they're conflated sometimes when you just get very technical. So yeah, the philosophical perspective is very important.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, my friend, we're hitting 2 hours. We had the intention that, I think it was a bonus, right? I mean, we started 25 minutes late, and I think we delivered. We delivered a lively, fun conversation, at least by the flow of the comments. And this may be what's really engaging. I'd like to see more of this. So thanks everybody who's tuned in, and I think that's going to be a good note to end things on. Hey, what do you think, Ty?
I think it's a great note. We'll do some final housekeeping here. Make sure you like the video we are watching. Make sure you comment after the video. It helps with the algorithm. And if you're on Twitter, make sure you retweet. Make sure you like. We will be back next week, hopefully with Phil Dobby and Steve Keane. We're going to work out some technical details, but I think we'll get there. So until next week, we have Dan Sanderson on your left, and I'm Ty Keynes. We will see you next week. Bye now. And we did it again. Now, as I said, our last show was canceled after you appeared on it, so Fingers crossed the executives don't do that again.
The more I read in the neoclassical thing, the more I just, my scratching my eyeballs out all the time.
The voice of God in the background.
Oh, geez.
If I could take it.
Once the coins get warm enough because of your body temperature in the winter, it actually keeps you moderate beer drinking in the evenings. Well, that's inspiring for a Saturday morning.